Picture this. It's June 6, 1944, D-Day, and you're a German machine gunner dug into the cliffs of Normandy, watching thousands of Allied soldiers storm the beaches below. Your position is supposedly impregnable, protected by concrete bunkers and overlapping fields of fire that have been designed by the best military engineers in the Reich. The Atlantic Wall stretches for hundreds of miles, bristling with artillery, machine guns, and obstacles designed to turn any invasion into a massacre. Then, through the smoke and chaos of the largest amphibious invasion in history, you see something that makes you question not just your sanity, but everything you thought you knew about modern warfare. Charging up the beach toward your position is a British officer wielding a medieval Scottish broadsword in one hand and carrying a longbow on his back. He's playing bagpipes while leading his men into battle, the haunting melody somehow audible even over the thunder of artillery and the rattle of machine gun fire. He's heading straight for your bunker with the kind of wild-eyed enthusiasm that suggests he's either completely insane or the most dangerous man you've ever encountered. As he gets closer, you realize he's not just carrying these ancient weapons as symbols, he's actually using them, shooting arrows with deadly precision and preparing to assault your position with a sword that looks like it belongs in a museum. This isn't a scene from a fantasy movie or a fever dream induced by too much combat stress. This is Lieutenant Colonel John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, known to his men as Mad Jack, and he's about to capture your entire unit using weapons that were already obsolete when your grandfather's grandfather was born. What if I told you that this eccentric British officer would go on to capture 42 German prisoners using nothing but a longbow, a broadsword, and sheer audacity? What if I told you that he believed any officer who went into battle without his sword was improperly dressed, and that he proved it by becoming one of the most effective and feared commandos of World War II? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, whether you're a history buff in Manchester, a military enthusiast in Munich, or discovering this incredible story from somewhere completely unexpected. I love connecting with our global community. The story you're about to hear will completely shatter everything you think you know about modern warfare, military protocol, and the limits of human audacity. Today we're going to reveal how one eccentric British officer turned World War II into his personal medieval adventure, how he used thousand-year-old weapons to terrorize Nazi forces across Europe, and how his unconventional methods saved countless Allied lives while driving German commanders to complete distraction and forcing them to question their most basic assumptions about combat. To understand how a man with a longbow and sword could become one of the most effective soldiers of World War II, we need to go back to 1906 and the birth of John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill in British Hong Kong, where his father served as a colonial administrator in the vast machinery of the British Empire. From the very beginning, Jack Churchill was different from other children in ways that would have profound implications for the future of warfare. While his peers played with toy soldiers and cricket bats, young Jack was utterly fascinated by medieval history, ancient weapons, and the romantic notion of chivalric warfare that seemed to belong to a completely different world. Jack spent his childhood reading tales of knights and warriors, practicing archery in his family's garden, with a dedication that bordered on obsession, and dreaming of a time when battles were decided by individual courage and skill, rather than industrial firepower and mass production. His parents, typical products of the British colonial establishment, initially viewed these interests as harmless childhood fantasies that he would eventually outgrow as he matured and took his place in the conventional world of adult responsibilities. Jack's family background was steeped in military tradition that stretched back for generations, but even by the standards of a military family with a long history of service to the crown, his interests were considered deeply eccentric and potentially problematic. His father was a career civil servant in the colonial administration, a man who understood the importance of following established procedures and maintaining proper appearances. His mother came from a long line of Scottish military officers who had served with distinction in campaigns across the empire, men who valued discipline, tradition, and adherence to military protocol above all else. The family expected Jack to follow a conventional military career, rising through the ranks of the British Army through competence, connections, and careful attention to the unwritten rules that governed military advancement. They had no idea that their son would completely redefine what conventional military service could look like, or that his childhood obsessions would eventually make him one of the most feared and effective soldiers of the most destructive war in human history. As a young man, Jack Churchill was a fascinating study in contradictions that would define his entire approach to life and warfare. He was simultaneously a product of the British establishment and a complete rebel against its most cherished conventions. He understood the importance of tradition and protocol, but he also believed that effectiveness was more important than conformity, and that results mattered more than appearances. This tension between respect for tradition and willingness to innovate would become the defining characteristic of his military career. Jack attended the Royal Military College at Sandhurst, the prestigious institution that had trained generations of British officers for service across the empire. At Sandhurst, he excelled in traditional military subjects like tactics, strategy, and military history, demonstrating the intellectual capacity and leadership potential that his instructors expected from future officers. But he also spent his free time practicing archery and sword fighting, skills that his fellow cadets and instructors considered amusing anachronisms that had no place in modern military service. His instructors noted his exceptional leadership abilities and tactical intelligence in their reports, praising his ability to inspire confidence in his men and his innovative approach to solving military problems. But they also worried about his tendency to question established procedures and his fascination with what they considered obsolete military techniques that belonged in museums rather than on modern battlefields. They saw potential in Jack Churchill, but they also saw a young officer who might struggle to fit into the rigid hierarchy and established procedures of the peacetime British Army. After graduating from Sandhurst in 1926, Churchill was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Manchester Regiment, beginning what should have been a conventional military career in one of the British Army's most respected units. His early military career was marked by competence and professionalism that satisfied his superiors, but also by a series of incidents that established his reputation as an officer who did things his own way, regardless of what regulations or conventional wisdom might suggest. He served in Burma, where the British Empire was consolidating its control over the diverse ethnic groups and challenging terrain of Southeast Asia. It was here that Jack developed his skills in jungle warfare and unconventional tactics, learning to adapt European military techniques to environments and enemies that didn't conform to textbook examples. The experience taught him that flexibility and innovation were often more valuable than adherence to established doctrine, and that the most effective solutions were often those that seemed impossible or impractical to conventional thinking. He also spent time in India, where the British Raj was dealing with growing nationalist movements and the complex challenges of governing a vast, diverse population with limited military resources. Here, Jack studied local martial arts and weapons techniques, always seeking to expand his understanding of combat beyond the narrow confines of modern European military doctrine. He learned that different cultures had developed different approaches to warfare, and that there was much to be learned from studying techniques that had been refined over centuries of practical application. But it was during his leave periods that Jack Churchill truly came alive and began to develop the skills that would make him legendary. He became an accomplished archer, winning numerous competitions and even representing Britain in international archery championships, where he competed against the best archers in the world. His dedication to the sport was extraordinary. He would practice for hours every day, constantly refining his technique and pushing the limits of what was possible with a longbow. He learned to play the bagpipes, mastering the instrument with the same intensity and dedication he brought to everything else in his life. The bagpipes weren't just a hobby for Jack, they were a connection to his Scottish heritage and a tool that he would later use to devastating psychological effect on the battlefields of World War II. He studied medieval swordsmanship, learning techniques that had been forgotten for centuries and adapting them for potential use in modern combat situations. To his fellow officers, these hobbies seemed like harmless eccentricities that set Jack apart from his peers, but didn't interfere with his military duties. They had no idea that Jack was systematically preparing for a war that hadn't started yet, developing skills that would prove invaluable when conventional military techniques proved inadequate for the challenges he would face. When World War II began in September 1939, Jack Churchill was serving as a staff officer in a comfortable posting that should have kept him well away from combat and the dangers that awaited those who sought active service in what was clearly going to be a long and brutal conflict. But comfort and safety were the last things on Jack's mind as Europe plunged into the most destructive war in human history. He immediately volunteered for the most dangerous assignments available, seeking opportunities to put his unconventional skills to the test against an enemy that represented everything he opposed. His superiors, initially skeptical of his methods and concerned about his unorthodox approach to military service, quickly learned that Jack's eccentric approach to warfare produced results that conventional tactics couldn't match. His willingness to take risks and try unconventional solutions made him valuable in situations where standard procedures had failed or were inadequate for the challenges at hand. Jack's first taste of combat came during the Norwegian campaign in 1940, where he served with the Manchester Regiment in the disastrous Allied attempt to prevent the German invasion of Norway. The campaign was a strategic failure that demonstrated the German military's superiority in planning, equipment, and execution, but it also provided Jack with his first opportunity to test his unconventional methods against a modern, well-equipped enemy. It was here that Jack first demonstrated the effectiveness of his medieval approach to modern warfare in actual combat conditions. During a night raid on a German position that conventional tactics had failed to capture, Jack led his men armed with his longbow and broadsword, weapons that made no noise and created no muzzle flash to give away their position to enemy sentries or supporting units. The psychological impact on German soldiers was immediate and devastating, far exceeding what anyone had expected from such an unconventional approach. Imagine being a German sentry in the Norwegian wilderness, expecting to face British soldiers armed with rifles and machine guns, only to be confronted by a figure from a medieval nightmare, wielding a 6-foot sword and shooting arrows with deadly accuracy. The Germans had been trained to fight a modern war against modern enemies using modern weapons and tactics, not to deal with what appeared to be a time-traveling Viking warrior who had somehow materialized on a 20th century battlefield. Jack's success in Norway brought him to the attention of the newly formed commandos, elite British units designed specifically for unconventional warfare behind enemy lines. The commandos were looking for officers who could think outside the box, who could adapt to unusual situations that conventional military training hadn't prepared them for, and who could inspire men to attempt seemingly impossible missions against overwhelming odds. Jack Churchill was exactly what they needed, even if his methods seemed to belong to a different century entirely. Joining the commandos in 1940, Jack found himself in an environment where his unconventional approach was not just tolerated, but actively encouraged by commanders who understood that fighting the Germans would require innovation and creativity rather than adherence to established doctrine. The commandos were tasked with conducting raids on German-occupied territory, missions that required stealth, surprise, and the ability to achieve maximum impact with minimal resources against an enemy that controlled most of Europe. Jack's medieval weapons proved perfectly suited to these requirements, offering silent killing power and psychological intimidation that modern weapons simply couldn't match. His longbow could eliminate sentries without alerting nearby units, while his sword provided a psychological weapon that was far more effective than its practical capabilities might suggest. Jack's longbow was not just a weapon, but a precision instrument that he had mastered through years of dedicated practice and study. He could hit targets at ranges exceeding 200 yards with deadly accuracy, and his arrows made no sound that could alert enemy sentries or reveal his position to supporting units. More importantly, the sight of arrows appearing silently out of the darkness created a level of terror among German troops that was far more effective than conventional weapons in achieving tactical objectives. The psychological impact of Jack's arrows went far beyond their immediate tactical effect. German soldiers who survived encounters with Jack's unit spread stories of ghostly archers and supernatural warriors that undermined German morale across entire sectors of the front. These stories, dismissed by German commanders as superstition and combat fatigue, actually represented a form of psychological warfare that was far more effective than any propaganda campaign. His Scottish broadsword was equally effective, both as a practical weapon and as a psychological tool that challenged German assumptions about modern warfare. The sword was a genuine antique, passed down through his family for generations, and Jack had spent years learning to wield it with deadly efficiency, using techniques that had been developed and refined over centuries of actual combat use. In close combat, the sword gave him reach and striking power that surprised enemies expecting to face conventional weapons like pistols and rifles. The sword's length allowed him to engage multiple opponents simultaneously, while its weight and balance made it devastatingly effective in the hands of someone who understood how to use it properly. But more than its practical effectiveness, the sword represented something that struck at the heart of German military psychology and challenged their most basic assumptions about warfare. The German military machine was built on the concept of technological superiority and industrial efficiency. The belief that advanced weapons and modern tactics made them invincible against enemies using inferior equipment. German soldiers had been taught to believe that their superior technology and training guaranteed victory against any opponent, regardless of individual courage or tactical innovation. The sight of a British officer charging into battle with a medieval sword challenged this fundamental assumption and created doubt about German technological supremacy that spread far beyond individual encounters. If a man with a sword could defeat German soldiers armed with modern weapons, what did that say about the supposed superiority of German military technology and training? Jack's first major success came during the Lofoten Islands raid in March 1941, one of the first major commando operations of the war and a mission designed to test the effectiveness of these new elite units against German defenses. The mission was to destroy German installations and capture prisoners for intelligence purposes, objectives that required stealth, precision, and the ability to overcome prepared defenses with limited resources. Jack led his men ashore armed with his longbow and sword, moving silently through the Norwegian landscape to approach German positions undetected by sentries or patrol units. His knowledge of medieval tactics, adapted for modern conditions, allowed him to plan approaches and attacks that German defenders hadn't anticipated and weren't prepared to counter. The raid was a complete success, with Jack personally capturing several German prisoners using only his medieval weapons and the psychological intimidation they provided. The Germans, caught completely off guard by the silent approach and unconventional weapons, surrendered without significant resistance, unable to comprehend what they were facing or how to respond effectively. But the real impact of the raid was psychological rather than tactical. German intelligence reports described encounters with British forces using primitive weapons and medieval tactics that seemed to defy rational explanation. These reports, circulated throughout the German military hierarchy, created uncertainty and fear that was far more valuable than any tactical advantage the raid had achieved. Jack's reputation began to spread throughout the German military, creating a legend that was far more valuable than any conventional military achievement could have been. German soldiers began to fear encounters with British commandos, not because of their superior firepower or overwhelming numbers, but because of stories about the mysterious officer who fought like a medieval warrior and seemed to appear out of nowhere to strike at German positions. The psychological warfare aspect of Jack's methods was not accidental. He understood that fear and uncertainty could be more effective than bullets in undermining enemy morale and achieving strategic objectives. He deliberately cultivated his image as an anachronistic warrior, using his bagpipes to announce his presence during attacks and his sword to create a visual symbol that would be remembered and feared by survivors. Jack's use of bagpipes was particularly effective as a psychological weapon, as the haunting sound of Scottish music in the middle of a battle created an atmosphere of unreality that was deeply unsettling to German soldiers. The bagpipes served multiple purposes. They inspired Jack's own men, demoralized the enemy, and created a distinctive signature that made Jack's presence known across the battlefield. Jack's most famous exploit came during the Salerno landings in September 1943, when Allied forces invaded mainland Italy in an operation designed to knock Italy out of the war and establish a foothold on the European continent. Jack was commanding a commando unit tasked with capturing key positions inland from the beaches, missions that required rapid movement, and the ability to overcome prepared defenses with limited resources and no possibility of immediate reinforcement. Leading his men inland from the beaches, Jack encountered a series of German defensive positions that had been carefully prepared to delay the Allied advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive and counterattack. These positions were well designed and professionally constructed, with machine gun nests and mortar positions that could devastate conventional infantry attacks and force the Allies to commit far more resources than they could afford. But Jack had no intention of conducting a conventional attack against prepared positions when unconventional methods offered better prospects for success. Using his longbow to eliminate sentries silently, Jack led his men in a series of night attacks that bypassed German strongpoints and struck directly at command and communication centers that were the key to the entire defensive system. His arrows, fired from concealment with the accuracy that came from years of dedicated practice, created panic among German defenders who couldn't understand where the attacks were coming from or how to respond effectively. The psychological impact was so severe that entire German units began withdrawing from positions that were still tactically sound, fearing encounters with the mysterious archer, who seemed to strike without warning and disappear before counterattacks could be organized. The climax of Jack's Italian campaign came when he single-handedly captured a German observation post that was directing artillery fire against Allied positions and causing significant casualties among the advancing forces. The observation post was strategically located and heavily defended, making it a crucial target that conventional attacks had failed to capture despite repeated attempts. Approaching the position alone under cover of darkness, armed only with his sword and bagpipes, Jack used his knowledge of medieval stealth techniques to infiltrate the German position without being detected by sentries or electronic surveillance equipment. When he was finally detected by a German soldier, instead of retreating or calling for support, he began playing his bagpipes while advancing on the German soldiers with his sword drawn. The sight of a lone British officer playing bagpipes while advancing with a medieval sword was so surreal and terrifying that the German soldiers, veteran troops who had fought across Europe and survived some of the most brutal battles of the war, simply surrendered without firing a shot. The psychological impact of Jack's approach was so overwhelming that trained soldiers chose surrender over combat, despite having superior numbers and defensive positions. Jack captured the entire garrison of 42 men, along with valuable intelligence about German defensive positions and artillery placement, using nothing but psychological intimidation and the sheer audacity of his approach. The intelligence gathered from the captured position proved crucial for subsequent Allied operations and saved countless lives by allowing Allied forces to avoid German defensive preparations. The capture of 42 German prisoners by a single officer, armed with medieval weapons, became legendary throughout the Allied forces and created a propaganda victory that was worth far more than the tactical success of the mission itself. Stories of Mad Jack Churchill spread throughout the British Army and beyond, inspiring other soldiers and demonstrating that individual courage and unconventional thinking could achieve results that conventional tactics couldn't match. But Jack's success wasn't just about his weapons or his psychological tactics. It was fundamentally about his understanding of leadership and his ability to inspire men to attempt seemingly impossible missions under the most dangerous circumstances. His troops followed him not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in his ability to bring them through dangerous situations alive and achieve objectives that other commanders considered impossible. Jack's unconventional methods created a sense of invincibility among his men that made them far more effective than conventional units with superior equipment and numerical advantages. His soldiers understood that they were part of something special, that their commander's unique approach gave them capabilities that other units couldn't match, and that their unconventional methods were actually advantages rather than handicaps. Jack's leadership style was as unconventional as his weapons and tactics, reflecting his understanding that effective leadership required adaptation to circumstances rather than rigid adherence to established procedures. He led from the front, always taking the greatest risks himself and never asking his men to do anything he wouldn't do personally. This approach earned him the absolute loyalty of his troops and created a unit cohesion that was remarkable even by commando standards. He treated his soldiers as individuals rather than interchangeable parts of a military machine, taking time to understand their strengths and weaknesses and adapting his tactics to make the best use of their abilities. This personal approach to leadership created a level of trust and mutual respect that was essential for the dangerous missions that commando units were required to undertake. His use of humor and eccentricity was also a crucial part of his leadership approach, serving purposes that went far beyond entertainment or morale building. By maintaining his sense of humor and his commitment to his unconventional methods even under the most dangerous circumstances, Jack showed his men that it was possible to maintain one's humanity and individuality even in the dehumanizing environment of modern warfare. This psychological resilience was crucial for maintaining morale during the long, dangerous missions that commando units were required to undertake, often behind enemy lines, with no possibility of immediate support or evacuation. Jack's example showed his men that they could face any challenge while remaining true to themselves and their values. Jack's methods also demonstrated the importance of adaptability and creative thinking in military operations, qualities that were often discouraged by conventional military training that emphasized adherence to established procedures. While other officers relied on standard procedures and conventional tactics that enemies could predict and counter, Jack was constantly innovating and adapting his approach based on the specific circumstances he encountered. His willingness to use whatever tools and methods were most effective, regardless of how unconventional they might seem to traditional military thinking, gave him tactical advantages that more rigid commanders couldn't achieve. This flexibility allowed him to exploit opportunities that other commanders missed and to achieve objectives that conventional wisdom considered impossible. The intelligence value of Jack's operations was enormous, as his unconventional methods allowed him to gather information that conventional reconnaissance couldn't obtain safely or effectively. His ability to approach enemy positions silently and capture prisoners without alerting nearby units provided Allied commanders with detailed intelligence about German defensive preparations, troop movements, and strategic planning. This intelligence was crucial for planning major operations and avoiding costly mistakes that could have resulted in thousands of unnecessary casualties. Jack's unconventional methods often provided the only reliable information available about German positions and capabilities in crucial sectors of the front. Jack's success also highlighted significant limitations in German military doctrine, which was based on the assumption that all enemies would fight using conventional methods and modern weapons that German forces had been trained to counter. The German military machine was supremely effective against conventional opponents using predictable tactics, but it struggled to adapt to unconventional threats that didn't fit established patterns. Jack's medieval approach to warfare exploited these doctrinal blind spots and created tactical advantages that conventional forces couldn't achieve through superior firepower or numerical superiority. His success demonstrated that innovation and unconventional thinking could overcome significant disadvantages in equipment and resources. As the war progressed, Jack's reputation continued to grow, and his methods began to influence other commando units and special forces operations throughout the Allied military. His success demonstrated that unconventional thinking and individual initiative could be force multipliers that allowed small units to achieve results far beyond what their size and equipment would suggest was possible. This lesson would become fundamental to the development of modern special forces doctrine, influencing military thinking long after the war ended, and Jack's specific methods were no longer relevant to contemporary warfare. The principle that small, highly trained units using unconventional methods could achieve strategic results became a cornerstone of military planning. Jack's later operations included extensive missions in Yugoslavia, where he worked with local resistance forces to conduct operations behind German lines in some of the most challenging terrain and political circumstances of the entire war. His ability to adapt his methods to different environments and work effectively with irregular forces demonstrated the versatility of his approach and his understanding that effective warfare required flexibility and cultural sensitivity as well as tactical skill. Working with Yugoslav partisans required Jack to adapt his leadership style and tactical methods to accommodate fighters who had different training, equipment, and cultural backgrounds than British soldiers. His success in these operations demonstrated that his unconventional approach was not just effective against German forces, but could be adapted to work with diverse allies under challenging circumstances. The psychological impact of Jack's operations extended far beyond their immediate tactical results, creating effects that influenced German planning and morale across entire theaters of operation. German intelligence reports from throughout the war contain references to the mysterious British officer who fought with medieval weapons, and these reports show that Jack's methods created uncertainty and fear that affected German decision-making at strategic levels. German commanders were forced to allocate resources to counter threats that they didn't fully understand, diverting attention and resources from other priorities. The psychological impact of Jack's operations was a form of strategic warfare that achieved results far beyond what his small unit could have accomplished through conventional means. Jack's story also illustrates the crucial importance of individual initiative and personal responsibility in military operations, qualities that are often undervalued in discussions of modern warfare that focus on technology and systems. While modern warfare is often seen as a contest between massive industrial and technological systems, Jack demonstrated that individual courage and creativity could still play decisive roles in determining the outcome of battles and campaigns. The contrast between Jack's methods and the industrial scale of World War II highlights one of the fundamental tensions of modern warfare, the ongoing conflict between the human elements of combat and the technological systems that increasingly dominate contemporary battlefields. Jack's success showed that human factors like morale, leadership, and psychological warfare remained crucial even in an age of mechanized combat and mass production. Jack's unconventional approach also demonstrated the enduring value of preserving and understanding historical military techniques and traditions, even when they seem completely obsolete to contemporary thinking. His knowledge of medieval weapons and tactics, which seemed irrelevant to his contemporaries, proved to be valuable tools that could be adapted to modern circumstances in ways that no one had anticipated. This lesson about the importance of maintaining diverse military knowledge and skills remains relevant for contemporary military organizations, which must balance the need for modern training with the preservation of traditional knowledge that might prove valuable under unexpected circumstances. The legacy of Jack Churchill's wartime service extends far beyond his individual achievements to encompass broader lessons about leadership, innovation, and the human dimension of warfare that remain relevant today. His story shows that effectiveness in combat comes not just from superior technology or overwhelming force, but from the ability to think creatively, adapt to circumstances, and inspire others to achieve more than they thought possible. Jack's post-war career was as unconventional as his wartime service, reflecting his continued commitment to the principles that had made him successful during the war. He continued to serve in the British Army, participating in operations in Palestine and other trouble spots, where his special skills remained valuable for dealing with unconventional threats and challenging circumstances. He also pursued his interests in archery and medieval history, becoming a recognized expert in historical weapons and tactics, who contributed to scholarly understanding of medieval warfare and its potential applications to modern circumstances. His expertise was sought by historians, weapons experts, and military professionals who wanted to understand how traditional techniques could be adapted for contemporary use. Throughout his later life, Jack remained committed to the principles that had made him successful during the war: the importance of individual initiative, the value of unconventional thinking, and the belief that any challenge could be overcome with sufficient courage and creativity. He continued to inspire others through his example and his willingness to share his knowledge and experience with younger generations of military officers and civilian enthusiasts. The story of Mad Jack Churchill reminds us that even in an age of advanced technology and industrial warfare, individual courage and unconventional thinking can still make a decisive difference in achieving seemingly impossible objectives. His success with medieval weapons in World War II demonstrates that effectiveness comes not from following established procedures, but from understanding fundamental principles and having the courage to apply them in new and creative ways. Jack's legacy also highlights the crucial importance of maintaining diverse skills and knowledge, even when they seem obsolete or irrelevant to current circumstances. His expertise in archery and swordsmanship, developed as hobbies and personal interests, became valuable military assets when circumstances required unconventional solutions to tactical problems that conventional methods couldn't solve. Today, as we face our own challenges and conflicts in an increasingly complex world, the story of Mad Jack Churchill serves as a powerful reminder that breakthrough solutions often come from unexpected directions, and that the most effective approaches are often those that challenge conventional wisdom and established procedures. His example shows that individual initiative and creative thinking remain powerful tools for overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. The next time you face a challenge that seems to require conventional solutions, remember Jack Churchill charging up the beaches of Normandy with his longbow and broadsword, proving that sometimes the most effective approach is the one that everyone says won't work. Remember that the most powerful weapons are often not the most advanced technologies, but the courage to think differently and the determination to pursue unconventional solutions when conventional methods prove inadequate. Mad Jack Churchill's story stands as a testament to the power of individual courage and creativity to overcome any obstacle, and to the truth that the most effective warriors are often those who refuse to be limited by conventional thinking or established procedures. In a world that often seems dominated by technology and systems, his example reminds us that human ingenuity and determination remain the most powerful forces for achieving the impossible. Stories like Mad Jack Churchill's remind us that military history is filled with remarkable individuals who achieved extraordinary results through unconventional methods and sheer force of personality. From ancient warriors who changed the course of battles through individual heroism to modern special forces operators who accomplish impossible missions through creativity and determination. The most fascinating military stories are often about people who refused to accept limitations and found ways to turn their unique skills into decisive advantages. That's exactly what we explore here: the forgotten heroes, the unconventional tactics, and the extraordinary individuals who changed history by refusing to follow the rules. If you're fascinated by stories of courage and creativity that defied all expectations, if you want to discover more examples of how individual initiative can overcome any obstacle, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. The history of human conflict is filled with Mad Jacks who proved that the impossible is just another word for something that hasn't been tried yet, and their stories continue to inspire us to think beyond conventional limitations and find creative solutions to the challenges we face today.